struggle with peer editing in your classroom, I'm not gonna lie, I have struggled with this instructional mainstay off and on throughout my teaching career. I'm gonna list some reasons why teachers may not like peer editing, and I want you to see how many you can identify with. Number one, students might not take it seriously. Number two, students might sugarcoat their responses because they're giving feedback to friends or peers in the same classroom, and they don't want the other person to perceive them as too critical. They're worried about what others might think, in a nutshell, is the gist of that one. Number three, higher level students might become disenchanted with the peer editing experience when they receive inaccurate feedback or feedback that they could have given to themselves. Number four, students might not actually use the peer feedback to revise their paper, which is the goal, right? And then number five, students might value teacher feedback more than peer feedback for some of the above reasons. And that's a classroom culture and climate thing. We have to train students not to be overly dependent on our feedback as teachers, but to also value their peer feedback. And know that because you've trained the class in how to provide that feedback and you've given them a lot of examples and they know what to look for, they can receive that feedback with confidence and say, oh yeah, I remember that thing that we learned in class, or this is totally accurate. Thank you so much for responding to my work. And then lastly, it does take some time for us as teachers to pair students up and to check in and make sure that they are providing that accurate feedback to the other students. So I've had success in training students to be successful with peer feedback and review, but getting there can take some time. So you can't expect students to just off the bat, like magic, know what to do and be able to give feedback with accuracy. You have to train them and scaffold in order to get there. So that's what this video is going to talk about today. Let's start with the basics. Traditional peer editing is exactly what it sounds like: peers leaving comments for each other on their work. I remember in school having that one inevitable day when the teacher would say, hey, it's peer editing day, and boom, my paper would be shuffled off to a random student that I might have known very well, or maybe didn't know very well, that I might have respected and valued their feedback, that I might not have respected and valued their feedback. I don't remember my teacher telling us how to give feedback. It was just another activity. It was something that we did, going through the motions, so that we could then move on to turn in our work. Did I use the peer feedback that I received? Well, to tell you the truth, often I didn't. I don't remember it being especially useful to me as a writer. So remembering that, I don't want my own students to feel like when I ask them to peer edit that it's disconnected to what we do on the daily in my classroom. I don't want them to feel like it's another hoop to jump through or a useless endeavor or something to check off on their march to turn in their final product. What I do find redeeming and valuable about peer editing is as follows. Number one, students have an expanded audience for their work. Number two, students encounter a variety of work other than their own, expanding their toolbox of models and exemplars that they can use to feed themselves forward. And lastly, peer editing is a relationship affirming and community building activity. Even if it's just for that reason alone, I want students to be talking with each other about their writing. I want them to be reading each other's work, and I want them to be interacting with each other. So having that opportunity to have discussions of substance in the classroom, in addition to just the icebreakers and whatever that we do on the daily to build that classroom community, this is another way that we can build that level of respect, a rapport between students, which is so important for classroom management, so important for students' ability to feel comfortable in the classroom, so important for students' willingness to come to class excited to do whatever you've planned for the day, because they know that it will be an activity that allows them to have some choice and voice and interact with people in the classroom in a meaningful way. So to recap, planning to use just one classroom period for a peer editing activity does not mean automatically that it will be a productive use of your time, of the student's time. Instead, I want you to plan to purposefully instruct students on the skills needed to be an effective peer reviewer. Because let's face it, peer reviewing is a skill-based process. So why do we think that students will automatically be able to read a peer's paper and know what kind of comments to leave that will be helpful to that writer? Or you can move entirely to a writer's workshop model, or a model in which you conference with students one-on-one or conference with groups of students. Or you can have students self-assess their work using a stations-based activity or color coding. Even better is to bring all of these three things together and give students a variety of different ways to access feedback in the classroom and to get some tools for revision as writers. Have them peer review with each other, have them participate in conferences, and have them self-reflect. So next, let's talk about teaching students to leave effective feedback for each other. I would suggest starting small and building students' capacity to be accurate and helpful peer reviewers over time. To do this, I would suggest, first of all, that you model your own writing out loud in front of the students, telling them about what you're thinking, about what you're noticing. This can help build their capacity to read others' writing and think in those same ways, think in those same steps, to follow those same patterns as they are seeking to peer review. It's also really important to take the time in class to decode and unpack exemplar papers and models together. The goal for this is to help students see how each exemplar connects to one or more skills that you are teaching and expecting them to use for their writing assignment. Next, I want you to give students a specific role to play. Having students think of themselves as readers versus as just another friend in the class helps to get them in the correct mindset for effective peer review. It's also important to use clear and easy to use strategies for students to be able to access as they are peer reviewing, and we're going to go over some of those strategies in just a moment. And finally, it's important to hold students accountable for giving that effective feedback. So I told you that I would be giving you strategies. Here are 4 strategies for helping students to leave effective feedback for each other. Strategy number 1. Give students a specific focus for their feedback. Why is this helpful? Well, students can become overwhelmed, just like we as teachers can become overwhelmed if we have to mark all the things in any given paper. Giving them a specific focus for feedback is just best practice feedback strategy anyway, whether it's teachers responding to student work or students responding to student work. So why would we expect our students to mark everything in a draft when we ourselves as teachers would not do that because it's not best practice? Make sense? Second strategy is to have student writers first leave comments on their draft. They can be focusing on questions that they have for their peer reviewers or just things that they struggled with or were noticing themselves as writers. Having this done first supercharges peer review because it gives the peer reviewer a place to start and something to sink their teeth into. They can respond to those questions. They can focus on those areas that the writer is calling attention to. Number 3, you can give students sentence starters. Why is this helpful? Sentence starters give students a gentle nudge in the direction of effective feedback. They also give students the language of effective feedback, helping them to be more successful. Here are some of my favorite sentence starters. You'll notice that they're super simple. So giving these to peer reviewers gives students a framework for response, which helps them to be more effective as responders. You can have students say, "I'm noticing this," or "Can you clarify this?" or "I'm wondering this," or "When you say this, I'm thinking this, this, this. I'm wondering if you could do this, this, this." Like I said, these sentence frames or these sentence starters can help to jumpstart student peer review and response. And lastly, you can teach students what I call the three-part commentary. Why is this helpful? The three-part commentary goes beyond the sentence starters themselves to give students a framework for effective feedback. That doesn't mean that you can't pair this with the sentence starters or with some of the other strategies as well, but the three-part commentary is definitely a lesson that I do and something that I reinforce throughout the year to teach students how to leave an effective comment, what that effective comment looks like. Unlike sandwich feedback or tag feedback, this sets students up, this three-part commentary, to be less superficial with their response. And like everything, it's important to model for students. Part 1, have students describe what they're noticing. Part 2, have them tell the writer how what they're noticing impacts their reading experience. And then number 3, have the student remind the writer of a resource or an activity that we did in class, or offer a specific suggestion to help the writer improve in that area that they've just identified. So a full comment would look something like this. Part number 1, I'm noticing that you use the word thing 5 times in this section of your draft. Part 2, as a reader, I felt disconnected from what you were talking about and found myself wishing that I could picture what you were talking about in my head a little bit more as I was reading. Part 3, specific suggestion, right? Or reminder. Remember when we played the game of things in class to practice using concrete specific details? I'd suggest revisiting the handout that the teacher put on Google Classroom to help you replace thing with memorable, specific sensory details and concrete language. Like I said before, to get students to this level in their feedback and their commentary to each other, you have to be very methodical and purposeful as a teacher. You have to commit to teaching feedback as a skill, because it is a skill. Provide these strategies as resources and the three-part commentary as a guide, and then practice a lot. Practice again and again and again and again until students really do get the hang of it. And they will. Students do need to be held accountable for giving this level of quality feedback, and it is helpful for students to have multiple people look at their draft and provide comments. So approaching this from a teamwork perspective rather than, hey, this is your one shot, this is your one person to provide feedback to you, you are instead getting a more well-rounded perspective of your work if you are the writer in that class. So this is a way of scaffolding, especially in the beginning of the year as students are learning this approach and becoming more comfortable leaving feedback for each other, having them kind of tag team the feedback on a writer's draft or putting them in teams of 3 to 4 and have them take turns looking at each other's work and then discussing it with each other can be really effective until you know they are ready to kind of fly solo and give feedback by themselves on a particular writer's draft. Or it could be something that you approach by readiness. If certain students are ready and they're there, then maybe you group those students together and just let them go to town while you work with the ones who need a little bit more support. It's also important to give students a variety of different feedback experiences in your classroom. And for this reason, I've found success in pairing peer review with a writer's workshop approach, having them conference with each other in teams, like I said before, or having them come to you for a one-on-one conference, or leaving a comment for you and then you respond back and treat it like a conversation is effective as well. It's important for you as a teacher to be purposeful in how you are grouping those students. So depending on your students' needs, depending on the assignment, depending on skill level and readiness, you might choose to group students of similar ability together, or you might choose to mix things up. There are benefits and drawbacks to each approach, and it doesn't mean if you choose one specific approach for one peer review round or one assignment that you can't switch it up for the next one. You can leave these students together for the whole year and let them grow together, or you can mix up the groups each time you do this to give students a variety of different voices and experiences in receiving and giving the peer review. Finally, I think that there is value in teaching students to self-edit. So sometimes for this, I will pace students purposefully through a series of scaffolded self-reflection and revision steps. I will give them clear directives and timeframes. So for example, students, I want you to make sure that you have at least 3 repeated word transitions joining your paragraphs to each other. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to check on this and add those repeated word transitions if you don't already have them. Go forth and do as I'm asking you to do. If I am functioning in this capacity, I will decide beforehand what specific things I want students to reflect on and add to their drafts. And I will type each goal on a different slide with a different timer on each slide. So 1 goal and 1 timer per slide. I will project them on the board and I will move students through during the course of the class period this series of scaffolded self-reflection and revision steps. I've noticed that this really helps to focus students who might otherwise be kind of lost and drifting if I give them a large and unstructured block of time to reflect and edit their own work or peer review on another student's work. If they see the goal on the board is to do this one specific concrete thing and they have a certain amount of time in which to do it, you won't believe how this helps to laser focus some of your most unfocused students. Other times I will use the power of color coding. So I'll assign each skill or each part of the paper a different color and ask students to go through and color code where they have demonstrated that skill or where they have that part of their paper. So this helps students to see which aspects of their draft might be missing entirely or a little bit weak, and then help them to have a focus then for revision. An example of this, a really easy example, is if you want to have students focus on just one of their paragraphs and highlight their topic sentence in one color, highlight their transition in another color, highlight their evidence in one color, their paraphrase in another color, their explanation and their close reading in different colors. They could then see visually if that paragraph has everything that it needs in order to be successful. And if, for example, they have color-coded all the things and they see that their explanation and analysis is really, really short, or it's just as long as the topic sentence and the evidence itself, that's a sign to the student that they then need to expand and go a little bit deeper in that part of the paragraph that really should be the meatiest and the longest. So to wrap things up, I think that there's definitely a place and a time for peer review in the classroom, but we as teachers need to make sure that we are purposeful in training students over time, not just a one and done, to leave that quality feedback for each other and giving them the tools and the strategies and the time in which to do so. At the same time, with any feedback that students are receiving, you don't want to train them that feedback is a one and done or a one-stop shop, that their peer reviewers or you as a teacher or a combination of both are going to provide them with everything that they need to revise. Like revision is some brainless robot activity that they're just going to go forth and do exactly as they're told. No, there's thinking involved too. And quality feedback in the classroom means that you are not just spending one class period, you are building in opportunities for feedback along the way, along the writing process, and using a variety of strategies to help students receive and give feedback on their writing to each other's writing so that they can continually feed forward toward that final product, which hopefully will be all that much better because of these experiences. And by doing so, you're really showing students that you value their collaboration with each other, their voice as writers, and their ability to leave just as good a feedback on a student's draft as you would as a teacher. And yes, that's entirely possible. And students every year blow me away with their ability to notice things that I would notice and things that I wouldn't notice. And I'm reading their feedback and I'm saying, yes, that is exactly what I want you to be doing. But in order to get there, You have to make sure that you scaffold, that you model, that you rinse and repeat, that you affirm, that you redirect, that you give students the opportunity to learn the skill of becoming effective peer reviewers and feedback givers to each other. I hope that you found this video helpful and that you will try these strategies in your own classroom. Let me know how it goes in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this content, do me a favor, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that I can see you in the next video. Have a good day.